Morena koutou, tēnā rā mihi o te atanei. Koutou koutou mai nei, I hāpai ana tēnei kaupapa o te rā nei. So welcome to this meeting of the ESP and this discussion on the issues and options paper of the air plan. Before we start, I'll do a karakia. I think this karakia will carry us right through to the end of the committee meeting that follows the workshop, and then we'll leave to Richard to look after the afternoon. So rather than have karakia all the way through the day, so nō reira, whakarongo ake ai, ki te tangi a te manu nei, mā tui a ki runga, tui a ki raro, tui a ki waho, tui a ki roto, tui a i te here tangata, ka rongo te pō, ka rongo te ao. Tui te muka takata, e Hawaii ki nui, Hawaii ki roa, Hawaii ki pāma mai, aumi e hui e tāi ki e. So thank you, and thank you to Vita and James, the authors of the paper, and we have Fleur here as well, and Anita supporting the kaupapa of the discussion on the issues and options that are before us. Started their work in May, I think it was, and we had a workshop in September to give direction, and the team are looking for endorsement on the issues and options to go forward to the next phase of engagement. And I think there's a PowerPoint to follow. This workshop is being recorded and it's going online sometime today, later today. And the paper's been with us for a while, so I understand there's a PowerPoint to follow. So
there is on just. Oh, I've joined the meeting.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Well, while James is sorting the tech, I was just going to kind of introduce the topic and stuff. So I think. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah. Okay. All good. Okay. Awesome.
My fault.
Fair enough hearing at once. So I think you've met all the team. Yes, we've got Vita and James, and Sarah's over here, and I'll swap out with her once I've just done this little intro. So yeah, as Edward said, we're here to look at the issues and options for addressing air quality in Otago. This is part of our review of the air plan, which has been in place for about 20 years. So there has been updates to the plan, but as you know, the RMA requires plans to be reviewed every 10 years. So we are overdue for this process to be happening. Regional councils are responsible for managing discharges to air. And in fact, if we didn't have an air plan to make rules about discharges, they would all require consent. So it is important that we have this in place. Just at the national direction level, there's the environmental standards for air quality, which set requirements for monitoring air quality and prohibits some activities which are especially harmful to human health. So stuff like burning tyres and really quite nasty things. As Edward mentioned, we had a workshop earlier in the year where you provided input into the issues and options that we've worked up. So the team has taken the direction and input, and so we want to test back with you before we begin engagement on the issues and options. But yeah, any questions before we start, or I'll just hand over to the team. All right, take it away.
Very good. So my name's James, as I know. I think you've all met Vita. I'm rather new to the air plan space, so I'm going to be doing the simple bits, and then Vita's going to be diving into the detail. What we're here to talk about today is the issues and options that we want to go out to engagement with. So we want to show you what we've come up with, so post the meeting in September, from your feedback and from talking a bit about the air plan with our colleagues and looking at what our neighbour regions are doing, and some of the approaches that we've come up with to look at dealing with those issues. The thing to keep in mind as we go through today is that the options are not mutually exclusive. We've got a set of options and you can pick from among them. It's a bit of a smorgasbord, I suppose you could say. So probably the only one that we can't do is the same time as the others is the status quo. And other than that, you can choose from the list and tell us what you are comfortable with. It may be as we go through that you think that there are issues or approaches that haven't popped up that you would like to see pop up, and let us know that and we can carry those through to the meeting this afternoon. So we'll go through this in a issue by issue discussion. You will have seen in your paper, we've got a set of sort of 7 and sort of 4 issues. Sort of 4, because the first 3, we've come up with approaches for those that we think could make quite a big variation to what we're doing at the moment, if they're a bit more fulsome in terms of the change in approach that we might have. For the latter 4 issues, the changes we think are unlikely to be so great. And looking at the approaches that there are available, we think probably the path we're on, or what we have already in our minds, is looking pretty appropriate, and it's more a case of tweaking with regard to those issues. That's at least our perception at this point. Obviously, we have your comments today and engagement to go. So having said all of that, what are we looking to address? Well, this is the list of issues that we have at the moment at a high level, and what we'll be addressing today. It's those first 3 I was talking about: domestic heating, outdoor burning, and vehicle emissions, that we think we could have some variation in approach on. And those latter 4 there that we think will be the ones that we might want to stay the course on. So without any further ado, pass you on to the expert, and Vita will take you through issue by issue. What we'll do is we'll just discuss these as we come to them. So we'll have our discussion on domestic heating and make sure that it's hitting the points that you want to hit, and you can raise anything that you want to, anything extra with the options that you think we might need to hit. When we get to the end, we'll circle back and look at the issues. Once we've had a good look through all of them, that might give you an idea whether anything that needs to be addressed is not being addressed. So we'll circle back on the issues at the end. I'll pass on.
Thanks. Can I take your mouse?
You can, yeah. Just click on through.
Have we got this on diligent?
No, not the PowerPoint.
The PowerPoint is really just a further squeezing of the paper that you've got.
So we can make that paper thinks.
Yeah, so there's nothing in here that's not in the paper in front of you.
Could you move the thing on one for?
I sure can.
Thank you.
There we go.
I'm not going to revisit in any great detail the issues. You've all read through them and they're all fairly well known to you by now, I would have thought. But we're starting with domestic heating because it is the biggie, and solid fuel burners are the main source of air pollution in urban areas. And it is a public health issue. So exposure to these harmful emissions does cause harm to human health, to the point where it contributes to premature deaths. There are varying factors which contribute or exacerbate the issue. One of them is the technology of the burners. So this is sort of the difference between ultra low emission burners and different types of burners. The operation of the burner, whether people are building their fires correctly, for example, costs. Its wood can be very cheap to use, and you can forage for wood. So fuel poverty is an aspect of this that we need to consider. Weather conditions, in particular the inversion layer that doesn't allow the smoke to escape during winter, and the air plan rules, which are slightly different depending on where you live in Otago. So what can we do about it? The options that we've come up with, obviously the status quo, we can continue as we have been, which in terms of the existing air plan focuses on the most polluted towns, which are known as Zone 1 towns. And we require people in Zone 1 towns, when they're replacing their heater, to replace it with an ultra low emission burner. So beyond that, these are our options. So any new installation of solid fuel burner must meet the ultra low emission burner standards. We can phase out the burners that don't meet the ultra low emission burners. The current air plan does have a little bit of phasing out, but that was by 2013, and we were all expecting it to be sorted out by then, and it hasn't. So sort of revisiting that and thinking about new timescales. Then we've got an option 1D, no new installations of burners in new dwellings or existing dwellings which are currently not using burners, so they're using other heating methods. And then option 1E is a phase out of all solid fuel burners, which is the sort of biggest, option. And then we've got non-regulatory options, so kind of behaviour change campaigns, education campaigns and things like that. And that option will probably sit alongside of the other options that are brought forward, because it will be important to make sure that everybody is up to speed on any changes in the air plan. So I'm going to open it up now to discussion or questions.
I'll just add one point. When ULEBs first came onto the market, there was one manufacturer and they were really cost prohibitive. That's no longer the case. They're very similar in price to just a general 65% efficiency type solid fuel burner. So there was a barrier about 10, maybe even 10 years ago, that is slowly being removed, and there are more genuine ULEBs now available on the market. So just for context.
Sure, thanks for that. And just before we pass it to Tim, who's got his hand up, you will have seen Karen Coote's comments. So you'll have that on.
Yes,
Yeah, so
yes.
don't need to refer to those things. Kia ora, Tim.
Yes, you started with saying that premature deaths were resulting. Now, these premature deaths, how can we compare those with cigarette smoking or anything else? Have you got some sort of statistics around that?
Possibly you could Google it.
That's not good enough.
We do have, there is a model that was done last year, the Happens model, sorry, maybe the year before now. And they have calculated the number of premature deaths down to region level and actually down to district level as well. So that also includes hospitalizations and occurrences of asthma and even like reduced activity days. So it's like a really thorough health impacts stats. And then so yes, you could compare that to any other kind of health related stats.
If we're considering these options, or and some of them, phasing out all solid fuel burners, it's pretty drastic. How are we going to make a decision like that if we don't know what these premature deaths are, at what rate they are, or the significance of this sort of pollution on health?
We've modelled this the same way we've done with all of our other plans, which is we want your direction and then we'll build all of that stuff in as we go out. And so what if, for example, you said no new installations or phase out all, and we have a conversation with the community and we gather the information and come back to you with what the picture looks like. But this is around what's your level of comfort in terms of directions, knowing that this is an NES that's different to all the others. It has a health focus as opposed to and environmental benefits, but the other NESs are more environmentally focused. So we do have a lot of that information, and there will be a technical report that goes out with the engagement that underpins it, but we haven't pulled all the technical information through for today.
I'm not sure about the other councils, but I don't feel like the basis for this decision has been established around premature deaths.
So we've definitely got the information, we just haven't pulled it all through.
We need it. That's the thing.
We have Alan, Elliot, Andrew, and then Alexa. So over to Alan.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks. Look, having had a look at that Happens study, it's pretty shocking, the information about deaths and illnesses that are in there, but good if everyone can have a look at that too. I guess I really just wanted to explore one thing. I mean, this issue is all very much tied up with quality of housing, and particular insulation. What role can the ORC have when it comes to those issues of improving housing stock and home insulation?
Do you want to?
Well, I was going to say that it's would be a sort of partnership working, so probably more of a non-regulatory option that would fall under. So working with TAs, for example.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, that's right. So we don't have much ability over that space. So you'd be looking at Building Act and Building Code changes and or TA and work with the TAs in that space. There are non-regulatory options you could do. You could partner with some organisations and have a holistic approach to air quality, and you know what regional councils tend to do is focus just on the appliance. You've got obviously functions and obligations on the LGA that are broader than just the NES, so you do have that aspect. But if you're looking at a purely regulatory approach, then that's not generally a regional council.
Right, but there are options for taking a broader approach, which it seems to me may be, you know, going to bring you better results in the long run than just concentrating on one thing. We'll keep thinking about that one. Thanks, thank you.
Right, Elliot.
I was just wondering, in terms of because obviously the ULEBs are better than the non-ULEBs for solid fuel burners, and then a heat pump is better than either of those. But in terms of scale of you know how bad they are for air quality, is in a very broad sense. So the ULEBs, you know, like somewhere in the middle between a heat pump and a regular solid fuel burner? Are they essentially almost just a heat pump in terms of air quality, or they like, is a heat pump still far and away better?
Yes, I mean the heat pump in terms of immediate air quality doesn't burn anything, so it would be preferable to a burner in that respect. In terms of the degree of difference, I'm not sure.
Yeah, any kind of burning is going to be more like any other kind of burning than a heat pump. Yeah, it's still burning, and it's still very dependent on use, how it's used.
Andrew.
Thanks, Edward. My question sort of relates to the focus on the issue and options paper, but having a conversation with the TAs, because the TAs are at the coalface, excuse the pun, in terms of giving advice to people either putting burners in old home or existing homes or new homes. And I know that we are required to consult with them formally through a plan review process, but I'm wondering whether there's been a conversation, you may have a staff relationship there already happening, and that's great, but I just wonder the value of having some feedback from them before we actually formally adopt this paper. I know that's impossible, but just your thoughts.
Certainly for the next phase, consulting with the TAs on various things will be very important, because they'll be the delivery partner on a lot of these items, especially the non-regulatory things. And they also consent the burners. So there will be an awful lot of discussion about that. And so it is, yes, I mean, it's part of the next phase, essentially.
Okay, so at this point, you're not concerned that they haven't had a look or a shared a view at this point in time?
Well, we don't really have anything to take to them until after this workshop and meeting.
Okay, yeah, that's cool. Thank you.
Alexa.
Thanks, team. I've actually just found my answer in the Happens report. I was going to ask about domestic fires, pollution from those compared to motor vehicles, but I see that domestic fires are 74% of the anthropogenic source of PM 2.5, and motor vehicles at 17%. Thanks. Sorry.
Alexa, Brian.
Yeah, cool. I've got two, if I may. The first one is just comparing the ultra low burners with the status quo, the technical benefit.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Well, option 1B is the new installation of solid fuel burners must meet ULEB standards. And it's a little bit like Tim's question in terms of wanting a little bit more detail in terms of death. I'm wanting a little bit more detail in terms of the technical benefit of that.
Discharge differences between. Discharges.
So the ULEB criteria, it is lower emission. It has lower emission rates. However, in a real life setting, knowing what that actually is quite difficult. But the rate is less than 0.7 grams per kilogram of wood, and for a normal burner, it's 1.5. And that's the MFE, that's the current MFE thing, but that's changing to 1, isn't it, at some point? Yeah, so, but there's other criteria as well, there's like efficiency, and there's something to do with energy as well that makes it ULEB. Yeah, so I don't know how to answer that question.
It is quite technical because there are variables. So I think, I mean, we've now had kind of 2 questions around this. We do also have a report coming from a consultant on some of these options and what that looks like for Otago, and that will form part of as well of the technical paper.
Oh.
So that will be made available to you.
Yeah, the energy thing, you know, like you actually go through more wood with an ultra low, but you get less emissions. I mean, as a councillor, you know, I'm finding it a little bit difficult to go forward without, you know, some type of understanding in this area. And one of the reasons, sorry, Edward, one of the reasons I say this is we've been down this path many times before, and it would be nice if we, you know, made a step up. And to do that step up, we need to have a better understanding. Otherwise, if we can't make good decisions at this point, how the heck can the community make? I'll just make that point. My second point is I've read the report for committee, and I actually thought it was, you know, like a good, comprehensive, sort of academic report. But as I said, with some gaps, and the gaps, you know, the technical basis for science behind some of the options.
Yeah.
I think it'll take them, we've got a bit of time. But this other area that's just as important to me is, and I wish we would do it right, you know, at the start of this process. I mean, Andrew has talked about, you know, liaising and coordination with district councils, and that's particularly important. And another important area is, for goodness sake, let's find out what has worked in other regions, because other regions have done, you know, over the last 20 years, Christchurch, Nelson, what are the things that have worked in these areas, so that we don't, as councillors, don't just get a blank piece of paper and throw a dart at it with unknown, you know, technical behind it, that we can actually, you know, just a simple table. These are the things that work. These are the trends. This is what the future looks like, and these are the learnings. Because unless we're on that journey, we're going to drop the ball.
So we're not doing this in isolation. We've looked at other regional councils.
Well, I haven't read it.
We've talked with them about what works. That's why through some of the other options, you've got some different things. What we know is the status quo doesn't work, and the piece of work that Vita just referred to will tell us about what projections look like.
Well, what I'm asking for, Anita, is that is actually present, and maybe it's in there, I've missed it, but a table about these learnings so that we also can be on this journey. Yeah, I mean, if it's already been done, it'd be really easy. But I say again, I thought the report that you've written is actually a really good report, but there's some gaps in it. And I've tried to identify the 3 gaps: technical, district councils, and learnings from other regional. And I think if you can fill those gaps, we've got an opportunity to make some success in Otago. Thank you. Sorry, Edward.
So, Brian, that's why we're here.
Yeah.
Terry.
Thank you. Options 1B to 1E, are they intended to cover at the same level all of Otago? So if option 1E was chosen, a house in St Bathans with no neighbour within 5 kilometres, would be required to phase out wood burning, even though their power goes out possibly once a week?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and it's something that that is up for discussion. So at the moment, the focus is Otago is split up into 3 zones. Zone 1 towns, which all of the focus is on because they are the most polluted. The rest of the urban areas are Zone 2 towns. And then there's Zone 3, which is the rest of Otago. So one of the questions for councillors is, would it be better to sort of have the same rule for all householders or all urban householders, or urban householders within a certain size of property or something like that? What is equitable, what is fair, but also what will work and what is appropriate? So that's certainly up for discussion.
Remember too that at the moment we're not trying to get as far as making a decision on one of these or what mix of these will be appropriate, and whether we phase out burners in one place and don't in another place for exactly the reason that you've said. We're not quite there yet. The next phase will be consolidating that technical information, sort of partly in response to councillor's question, and also going out and engaging with other groups outside the ORC and saying, here are our ideas. What do you think? Do you have any other ideas? What other issues are there? Remember that what we're doing here is checking that the list of things we've got here are a list of things you are comfortable with being canvassed in the outside world. It's not about choosing one of these yet, or what mix it might be in.
Yeah, I guess though the problem is there isn't an option 1G that says a mixture of them all, although you have alluded to that. The other question I had was just a follow-up question from what Anita just said, that the status quo is not working. And do you think that's a fair statement, given when we look at practice, what firewood people are doing, what actual people are doing? You know, there are some absolute blatant standouts that just continue to happen, that under what current regulation we have, given we're in fragile areas here around heating, health and everything else. If you run out of firewood and you get a firewood contractor delivering you firewood in August or September, most likely it's wet. Every one I've looked at, it's wet because it's been cut late. There are things that can happen within the industry, just storage of it, that they are simple, blatant things that under the status quo we could potentially still achieve, but it's just how we change practice.
And that would be a 1A and a 1F. So for example, Southland, when we were down there, we introduced the Good Wood scheme. So people were certified, you knew who was certified, who had dry wood. We provided moisture. There's a whole lot of non-regulatory things that we can do to support existing things. We do have, I'm just trying to think about, Sarah was overseas, but we had the, and Ben covered it actually, the SOE report for air quality that came to you in April. There are some places where things are looking okay, but there are also places where the number of exceedances are getting worse and the extent of the exceedance is also getting worse. And we've got more towns that we now know we need to start monitoring. And so there will be small places potentially where maybe air quality was neutral or getting better, but they're growing. So, overall, it's not doing well. And there are places we know that it's just not getting better. That's not to say you can't say, maybe it's 1A plus 1F as an option, and do the non-regulatory stuff and build your good wood schemes and your certifiers and, do all that kind of stuff.
That's exactly where I went to. Anyway, thank you.
Gretchen.
Yeah, to me, this has quite a few parallels with what's happening in South Dunedin at the moment, where we have an issue, which is water caused by whatever it's caused by, but it's coming towards the area of South Dunedin, and as a result we need to go and talk to communities about a long list of options. And at this time we're not narrowing it down to an option, we're in fairness talking to a whole range of agencies, communities. We're recognising that areas are not homogenous throughout that whole area as well. And we're starting a fair conversation. So in this instance, we've got a problem and it's domestic heating. And we've got a list of options up there, which need to be like our long list, which are very broad, but then enable us to have decent conversations with people throughout Otago. And those people will be communities, but they'll also be other agencies that have responsibilities in the health space. You've already talked that that's not just us. For example, the stuff that some of our councillors have talked about to do with, hey, what's the mortality or, you know, the lesser than that health impacts. So that, but also what are the impacts of cold houses and things like that. And that's not our area of expertise, but it is stuff that we need to talk to people about. And yeah, we're going to have to put all that in the mix, same as South Dunedin, and come up with narrowing down based on technical input as well, which you've said, James, definitely comes in. We've definitely got a lot of it, but now isn't the exact time to get into that detail. We've got to have the fairness of the other conversations. Yeah.
Sure. I don't think I've heard any new option, but there's Ryan.
Have you considered another option of banning coal in Otago?
For domestic heating,
yes,
the solid fuel burner meeting the ULEP standards would essentially be a ban on coal, because coal is quite inefficient in terms of, or coal burners are inefficient. So it would essentially be a ban on coal.
We can add that as an explicit option. I can share my experience in Southland where we tried to do that and it did not land particularly well. And the science that was presented in the hearings in Southland was that the main difference between wood and coal is actually aesthetic and amenity and not health. Now, whether that science is still the same, I don't know, but it was more that you smelt coal more readily than you smelt wood. It didn't necessarily have a different impact in terms of PM10 and 2.5.
Well, my suggestion at this point, you know, get it as an option and see where the technical actually falls.
We can add it.
Until we've got the technical, it's sort of hard to say. And in response, you know, to the ultra low, you know, you wouldn't put coal in it. I agree with that. But, you know, the outcome of this process mightn't be with ultra low. It might be, for example, it might be about promoting non-regulatory. It might be about doing something with solid fuel burners. And around that particular outcome, you know, there may be some benefit with banning coal. You know, like it's not going to solve all problems, but it may solve some problems.
Yeah, we do have a little bit of information about how many households are currently using coal.
Okay, well, and how many?
I don't have that number off the top of
But
my
I
head.
think you'll find in certain areas, for example, Milton, which is a particular issue close to Kai, in some of these places, that, and possibly Dunedin to some extent, you know, there will be some issues, localised issues from coal.
The lady down the road from me, Brian, you know, I can tell you every time she stokes her fire up because it's got coal. So we can add 1G, FG, yep, sorry, I'll do my G. And we can go out on all of these options if that's your direction. Like we can have that conversation.
It might be a sub option, Anita. I'm not sure if it's an option of its own.
Yep,
Yeah,
we can.
I don't know.
Yeah, we can figure that one out.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Ed.
Sure, Kevin, then Lloyd.
A few. Sorry, it's struggling to pick up. Go. Yeah, I'm probably comfortable with 1, 2, and 3, and like by meeting ULEB standards, I could act as a coal fire salesman. I could come up with a coal fire that meets those standards and still be able to install it.
Yeah, potentially. And the other thing they can do is put cleaners on the chimneys, which actually, you know, deal with the emissions before they come out. So the technology is always moving in this space.
Yeah, so a particular response, you know, what I'm putting out could be equally as good, if not better than what.
Yeah,
design was.
potentially, there's
Yeah,
some
yeah.
better people out there. I don't think they're available at this point in time, but it wouldn't
Yeah.
necessarily mean,
Yeah.
if this was a direction that, I don't know that manufacturers would do it for one regional council, but if there was a direction from a lot of regional councils and that was the way the market needed to go, then the market generally responds in this,
Yeah.
in this space.
Yeah, and so, I just look at, and Councillor Wilson's not here, but when you get a phone call when power's out for a week in remote areas, it's we want gas fires as well. So we're saying, what can I have? They could sell more wool and more jerseys, but at the end of the day, we need to be heating those houses. So with what is, I'm trying to get an understanding of the size of this problem, and that we've had cozy homes going for about, I don't know, 10 odd years probably now, within Otago, and that's been funded by a mixture of government, councils and philanthropic trusts. I know Community Trust of Otago has put a fair chunk in over the last probably 6 or 8 years, and that's been going around all these areas, upgrading things, because now all rental homes have got to comply anyway with the insulation. So it's the next group of houses that aren't actually, so the privately owned, privately used houses. So what is this? What is the scope of that target that we're trying to hit? And my understanding of my understanding of the cozy home formula was that was based, the money given was based out on your capabilities to pay, so that's a deprivation level, and we could see clearly within that if you move that deprivation level to allow more people into that zone, we would have had a far bigger impact on changing insulation and changing heating. So where do we know all those sorts of figures? Have we got those figures to?
So sorry, Sarah and I were just talking about the,
Yeah, cool.
so basically it's your TA building consent numbers. And you've got to do a bit of an assessment of who installed a fire originally and how many have been replaced over time. And then when were they replaced, to be able to figure out how big exactly that problem is. But there will still be a lot of burners out there that don't meet the MFE standards.
Yeah, I know that's, like for instance, there's whole blocks of houses up in Oamaru that they went door to door and sold this, the scheme to, and they were all updated. So I just, to sell this, and because I'm quite comfortable with most of those heading in the right direction and being tough, because we've got to change it, but to sell the scale of what we want to do, we need to know the scale of it. And so it might not be as big a problem. There might be just one bad burner in a street could be enough to get your particular level up if you've got the other 20. I don't know. That's what
Yes, I mean, other regional councils have done quite a lot of kind of research into this, but you have to start from a baseline of what you know, which is tends to be the TA consents, and some of those might be wrong. So you start from a baseline and you kind of work your way up, and it takes a number of years to do that. So it takes people providing that information, it takes enforcement officers going out, it takes kind of checking it, and it will take a number of years to develop. I mean, it would be really useful to have that information to help inform and target education campaigns and things like that, and also intervention, because people may have barriers to accessing schemes like cozy homes, and I would love to be able to do that, go out and knock on people's doors and say, what help do you need? But it would take some investment, I think, to get something like that off the road. But yeah, I mean, if that's something you're interested in taking forward.
Well, I'm saying that's already there, and I don't know exactly where cozy homes, because I'm a couple of a year out of dealing with them, but the cozy home formula is still there. So I just wonder why we aren't, that what they've done, and that's just about gone.
So yeah, I mean, if we consult on all the options and we come back and say there's a really strong scientific and community direction, for example, 1C, then part of that is then we can, look to quantify what that looks like in terms of regulation, including the TAs and Cozy Homes Trust and, potential modelling on health impacts and all of those things. So we're certainly not doing this in isolation, and we're certainly
No,
intending
I understand.
but
No.
we need something to go and talk to them, talk to all of the groups and the community at large about in terms of what they want.
Yeah. Because it is quite easy for a TA to, you can't, they don't give you a permit for a new house unless you've actually, stated the make and model of the fire that you're putting in.
Yep, it's got to comply with MFE's current standards. I've just put one in myself, so, yep.
So it's not a hard one to monitor for a new house, is it? No.
No, and you do need a permit for a replacement fire as well, and they will decline permits for burners if you're not in the right air zone with the right type of burner. You won't get a permit.
Lloyd.
Thank you, Edward. I'd just like to say a couple of things. At the end of the day, it's an issues and options paper, so it's actually done a pretty good job setting out what the issues are and what the options are that you see. So well done for that. I think we have to be really careful. I just like concur with what Tim was saying around, if we have air quality that's going to cause deaths, you've got to be really careful going out with that sort of cordial. We've got to have the information to back it up. So I'd be really careful that it doesn't get sensationalized. Also, I think I quite like the ones, but when we're going out talking, we've got to be careful you don't go too far to one side or the other side. And I think probably going like isolating coal as a villain, I think would be going too far, because I think at the end of the day, it's about the emissions, not about the fuel source per se. So under option 1B is pretty much, or under the options is basically if it has to meet the ULEB standards. So if it's coal burners that can meet it, I don't see any issue with that, because you've got to remember technology will continue to change and improve. So it's all about the outcome rather than the actual fuel source right here, right now. And living in the country, I concur with what Councillor Malcolm was saying. If you don't have access to fires, you get quite cold on snowy days, because that's where if you have your fire, that's where you cook your soup and everything as well, because it's your one thing that you do have. So I think it's all pretty good. I'm pretty comfortable with everything. I think it's got to be because you're going to go out and get the discussions. I think option phase out all solid fuel burners is pretty much, I think that's the out there one, because at the end of the day, that's like taking away the major tool in people's toolkit to keep themselves warm. So you got to be really careful going into something that's quite as to actually dismiss it completely, because we as I say, technology will change and things always get better, so it's about the outcomes. That'll be my comments.
So we haven't designed the engagement yet, but we can absolutely, irrespective of what this list looks like, the questions are, within any of these options, are there particular things that we should be more stringent in terms of not allowing, rather than specifying things, and are there places where these rules should be different? So is there a rural urban, is there, do we need to drill down in some of our areas that we know are more challenging, or is it all of our urban areas that's the same? So we can actually add those layers, those lenses into the questions when we go out with the engagement. So then when we come back to, we can say, well, this is what it looks like, and because we understand that those rural urban issues, we understand that a whole lot of people get good access to firewood, and it's an easier means for them. Electricity is not reliable. We understand all of that, so we can absolutely add those lenses onto the engagement question, so that we can give you a more targeted response when we come back.
Yeah.
I think moving more to discussion. Option 1D kind of seems like a no-brainer to me, because we know that heat pumps are far and away better than any kind of burner. So for any new dwelling going in, we wouldn't want to be allowing more, port and stone than there already is in terms of dealing with what already is there. That's where it gets tricky, and obviously what 1E seems like it would be the most effective at that, but obviously, as other councillors have pointed out, there are some significant hurdles there around energy resilience, in remote places where your power might go out and stuff, and on those really cold days. But I think that if we can look at those hurdles and see what ways we can address those, if that is possible, and maybe build in some reasonable exceptions, and look at ways that we can reach out to the community, and maybe that is, as was discussed, kind of investing more in that cozy homes efforts to reach out to people and get that behavior change as well, or instead of phasing out in a regulatory sense. I'm not sure, but yeah, 1D seems like a no-brainer, and then I think we should look at the hurdles for phasing out all of the solid wood burners and see what is possible in that space.
Got it, Tim, Andrew, then Alan.
Yeah, I'm just trying to balance this whole thing. I understand the need for good air quality, I do, but human interaction with fire is timeless. It's happened for millennia. And I don't know if you experience a certain satisfaction from standing in front of a fire in the middle of the winter and feeling the warmth of that fire. I mean, this has to come into it as well. We can't regulate these sort of experiences out of people's lives. So just want to add that in.
I'm British, so it has been.
Thanks, Edward. Look, I'm comfortable with the options. I think this is a bit of a scoping exercise at this point. So yeah, happy. I just need to make a comment about cozy homes. As the trustee rep, EPA essentially provide the service that cozy homes have done in the past. Cozy homes at the moment are essentially looking at repurposing. So a little bit unsure of what that means because that process isn't complete. So yeah, EPA essentially replace the role that cozy homes have played.
Yeah, thanks. Look, I'd just like to note that from a climate change point of view, burning coal is something that we should not be doing at all, releasing that locked-in carbon. So to be taking any steps to enable or allow coal burning is not something we should do, I believe. But that may be enabled by, that may be just phasing out. I mean, phasing out all non-ultra low emission burners may achieve that. Yeah, I think there's probably a good case to be made for different rules in different places around the energy resilience is an important one, but also that there are certain towns where the health effects of that pollution is clearly much worse. So I think the differentiation may be a good way to go. Thanks.
Alan, Kate, then Alexa.
Thank you, and apologies for being in another meeting earlier. So this may be repetitive, but I agree about the coal, and I think we need to look like we're joined up thinking across that this isn't a siloed plan. I'm interested in understanding that with gas, which I know is not quite as bad, but is bad, because if we don't have wood fires, the gas is the only other way you can do heating and cooking, and that's not what you probably want to drive to. I think that the way this was presented is that phase out all solid fuel burners, get that in zones, but don't get that in some parts. And it's not just a rural urban thing. There are parts of urban, parts of Otago that need that resilience as well because of the climate. So I think that has to be much more nuanced. It's the black and whiteness of those options, which I think that need to be nuanced, and we'll get a better feel for that. We, as the Animal Place says in the first sentence, we're a very diverse place, and we have to have a plan that is fit for purpose for the diversity that's here.
Well, Alexa.
Good. I'm just, I agree with Alan and Kate on that. And our electricity supplies in a lot of areas are not strong enough to phase out solid fuel burners. I do think we need to rid ourselves of coal. But I'm wondering, and I might have missed this somewhere else, but these options, what in the scheme of what we could do about it, are siloed. I mean, there's a lot to be done around house design and insulations and all those things. And I know Cozy Homes addresses that, but I kind of feel that these options need to include that. And I'm not sure it's non-regulatory. Behaviour change is part of it, but I don't know what tools we have available to us to get involved in the regulation of better, more efficient designs, which would certainly help.
Yeah, so just, sorry, Alexa, we briefly touched on that before. Broadly speaking, it's outside of our regulatory control, but that doesn't mean it's outside of your functions under the LGA. So we can, I think the direction we're hearing is there's nothing there that you'd be really uncomfortable with us testing and socialising, understanding all those lenses, and then there can be you know, and what else should we do and who should we do it with, who should we partner with, sort of approach to pick up those broader non-regulatory or regulatory that isn't us options as well.
I just think when we're talking about this, we need to bring those in and find ways of doing it. And I think phasing out all solid fuel burners is going to be a scary thing to even talk about, frankly. I think we may lose people at that point if we... That's my thought.
Yeah, thanks, Alexa. Gary, then Gretchen.
Yeah, I agree. There are some there that I think we shouldn't consult on, and phasing out all solid burners is definitely one of them in my mind. Just on option 1D, it's not a no-brainer at all because heat pumps don't work below a certain temperature. Yes. So if the thinking is that right out in the rural area, the only option they're going to be left with is electric, then when you get down to, I think it's -2 or 3 or whatever, and especially in old stock homes, they don't function. So they stop.
It's not just a rural issue. My heat pump in Clyde used to stop quite regularly. So
exactly.
Yeah,
in my mind, across all of these options, as Kate said, it's very nuanced and it needs to be very focused in specific areas because most likely the issues are created by the location of the town itself. And it is an urban issue, not a rural issue. Thank you.
Sorry, point of clarification.
Yeah. Just wanted to check because maybe I was mistaken. There was 1D just for new dwelling. I mean, other than the existing dwellings.
No, it's new dwellings, or if an existing dwelling is using something that isn't a fire, it would also prohibit you putting a new fire into those dwellings.
So something else is already working there, essentially, right?
Or not.
So you would not
one bar heater.
Right. Okay. So
But yeah, a new house and new.
Got it, Gretchen.
Yeah, it's just kind of all the comments here and the diversity around our table, but then thinking about having been on the panel last time, and Brian will remember as well when we put this air plan in place, how much interest there was across Otago, far more than the land and water plan generates. We had over 1,000 submissions, formal ones. We want around half, I think, possibly a little bit less, but around that wanted to be heard. So people stood up and said exactly the things that Tim said. They stood up and said exactly the things that Ellen said as well. And there's that whole spectrum, and there's incredibly passionate about whatever their thing is. And I think having all of those options to discuss with our community is actually pretty important rather than narrowing it down, because I just think we lose quite a bit of credibility if we don't have the whole range there to talk about, because then you're going to want to talk about it. You're going to do it anyway.
Yeah, I think the options up there stimulated an awful lot of discussion, and there's probably no addition to them. I think coal's going to be integrated in the way that you go forward.
Yeah.
And the ORC is not isolated in terms of those options. You'll be talking to other program drivers and healthy homes and all the rest of it. There's a huge amount of information to come back in once you engage that then will inform the pathway forward in terms of developing the new air plan. So I have Kevin over here.
Yeah, look, I think D and E and especially E are going to create a furore just the same as a 250 cubic meter solid stack. Yeah, look, at the end of the day, it's completely impractical for so many areas until someone can guarantee me electricity. Well, it's just going to, and so why would you create that furore when what we're trying to do is get everyone into really good habits of burning good quality wood and getting the rubbish out of the system. Yeah, look, I don't think I wouldn't be putting 1D and 1E in the consultation document because I think that's a step too far. That will just create negativity about trying to get to those lower areas. And if I look at my own experience in Oamaru, so 5 k's out of Oamaru, a brand new heat pump in the 1972 house, completely newly lined and relined interior and completely insulated. My heat pump probably, I can't tell you the exact number of days, but regularly cut out. And this was the top. Really, we paid a lot of money for it, and it didn't work on those cold days. And that was probably about -2. So the new people that bought that house have since put a ULEB fire in there just out of necessity. Oamaru needs a heck of a lot of work done on it. When we lived in Oamaru, I couldn't go for a run in the winter because of the aversion layer. So we definitely need to do something in those sorts of places. And they're scattered throughout Otago. The Cozy Home system is a really, really, really good system. I just think went through a phase of lacking direction and probably lacking a wee bit of support to get that system going better. And that was around about the deprivation level where we could have put more funding in had we made another trigger, and that would have got a lot more work done there. So I just wouldn't be putting D and E in there. I just think that's counterproductive. Really.
Can I test something with you? So we're going to drop something into your resolutions for 11:30. If we went out for consultation and said, here are 4 options, here are 2 other options that council didn't support in the consultation document, but differentiated it, is that potentially an approach? Just because I don't want people to feel limited in terms of what they can provide back. So we could differentiate and say these ones were broadly supportive, these ones were less supported, but if you want to provide us feedback on them, then that's okay as well.
We'll put them all on the paper and see how that vote goes. It's probably the best way, isn't it? Put them all on the paper and then put them
for the consultation, for the engagement.
No, put them all in for us to vote on at the meeting and see which ones come out, I suppose.
As individual, okay, individual resolutions.
If we take them
individually.
Yeah.
Look, we probably need to wrap this one up. We're going to be doing that voting later on. We do get a question.
I'm interested in Tangata Whenua's view on this.
Yeah, look, that's why I think 1D and E should be in there to find that information out. I'd be really interested to know the percentage of new homes or those that have got alternative, and then drop out from that what are in poor state. Ōkaha directly involved in healthy homes. It's incredible. This housing stock in Otago, be interesting to know what that looks like, because that's got to influence the air plan, I think, in the way you choose your options. So I think they have to be in there to trigger that information back out to go into the mix. That's my personal view. Yeah. Richie.
Sorry, that's why I thought that as well, because it brings out the info and some rule themselves out. That's why I started with my South Dunedin long list, but some will rule themselves out. But going through the process in a robust way is really important. Yeah.
So we'll come to that 11:30. We should go on to the next category.
Oops.
Yeah, so that was the biggie. It's worthwhile spending some time discussing that.
Yes.
Probably the second biggest issue for discussion is outdoor burning. So this outdoor burning ranges from very small scale practices like bonfires to big rural activities like tussock burn-offs. And outdoor burning produces smoke which drifts, so it does cause adverse effects beyond the property boundary often, and it includes smoke, odour, ash deposit, and discharges which, depending on what's being burned, could be noxious or dangerous. And importantly, outdoor burning generates 1/3 of complaints to the pollution hotline, so it will be something that people are interested in. So it does depend on what's being burned. It depends on weather conditions, the proximity to, especially residential properties. Air plan rules, so they differ depending on the size of your property or your location of your property. Enforcement is a factor in terms of, you know, how it is controlled, how our enforcement team go out and address that. And also related to it is disposal of waste materials. So if people have good access to waste material, waste collection services, they're much less likely to burn it. So that's the issue. What can we do about it? So these are the options that we've come up with. So the first is the status quo. The second is banning outdoor burning over winter months, which is what some other regional authorities have done. Requires smoke management plans for, you know, the large scale events, which will help notify people, including the council. Ban outdoor burning on properties less than 2 hectares because of their proximity to their neighbours. Require alternatives to burning, so that could include something like wood chipping or composting. And then there are our suite of non-regulatory options, including education campaigns, enforcement, and then partnership with district and city councils.
Got it. Open to questions, points of clarification. Is that Andrew? No. Oh, okay.
Look, the winter months are handy for fire risk, as long as there's not an inversion. So look, we don't burn off. I don't see much purpose in it, but I do know that some people, it is a relevant tool. But the problem with saying all winter months is, I get the inversion layer, but if it's done when it's a clear blue sky day, yes, it's scenic and it's beautiful, but if you've got snow, it will stop the threat of fire getting up on a hill. Yeah, there's some nuance there that you have to be really careful about. And so I'm not quite sure if it's an inversion layer. If it's an inversion layer, why the rule wouldn't just be talking about that climatic condition. If you've got an inversion, you also don't see it as badly in the fog.
So again, I guess the question is there anything in this list that you think we shouldn't ask the community about? Is there anything in terms of the activity that we haven't included?
Yeah.
You know, so we can get all of those lenses.
Well, no, sorry. The question is, if you put it out there, yes, people say to stop ban it, but if they don't understand why it is used, and I think that's the understanding is why people do it when they do it.
We will provide all of that context. We won't just set it out cold. It'll all be contextualized. But and again, we can ask, you know, it could be one of the approaches we're considering is preventing outdoor burning over the winter months. Is there a reason that you'd support this? Are there things that we need to think about if you're going to do that? Like we've got to nuance the question so that we can get all of that feedback. And what I will say is NEP have tried to develop national criteria for outdoor burning, and it did not get very far very fast. So we do, Vita's had a look around what some other regional councils can do.
Can I ask a really stupid idea? Is this, should farm plans change, be something that would be better dealt with at a farm plan level if it was able to be a farm plan issue as opposed to just West Water?
I think that if there was scope in a farm plan, it's something that we could look to manage that way as well. That tool's not available for us yet. Yeah.
At the moment, that's not so easy to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's impossible.
Okay.
Alexa,
Thank you. Thanks for this, Anita. I'm just looking at comparing it with the report that the paper that we're receiving. But I think people in my area are going to be really concerned about, and we're going to get a lot of feedback on springtime burn-offs. And I guess that is covered under requiring alternatives to burning and requiring smoke management plans for large-scale burning events. And I just don't know how you're going to present that or how a smoke management plan might work in this area in Queenstown. I mean, I'm sure you're well aware of the complaints and the difficulties of springtime burn-offs that sit over this area in early spring. Because the best fire days are also the days that the smoke hangs about under the mountains. Think how are you thinking you're going to any of these might work for those?
Yes, I think potentially you're right, Alexa. It's like it would be, as we said at the start, no one option, but a combination of those options would have to work for some of that. And again, there might be some more nuances in terms of how close you are to an urban boundary, or where you are, or some of those geographical features that might result in different potentially different sets of scenarios for different parts of Otago.
Yeah, I mean, sorry.
It would require a change to some farming practices in this area to manage, to have an alternative, or to manage smoke, I think. Anyway.
Yeah, Gary, Andrew, and Kevin. Gary.
Try and ask these questions with a straight face. So in low rainfall areas, then like right across all the Central Otago, Queenstown Lakes, you have a window where it's safe to burn. So if you're looking at safety across a 12-month calendar year, across the winter, generally the sites you need to burn can be burnt and the fire shouldn't escape because it's wet, it's damp, it's green, it's whatever. And then you reach a point like about now, or earlier even, where like my firefighting hydrant that is right by the highway on my irrigation line was flat out all day Tuesday with fires because it was windy and the fire service were just there filling up all day. So in summer dry or in low rainfall areas, that like banning outdoor burning in winter months basically bans outdoor burning full stop. So the next question, if that was a question, the actual 2C's better. What would a smoke management plan be? When you light a fire, you create smoke. No matter how dry it is, there'll be a level of smoke. And then when you light a fire, you have no control over what the weather is going to do. You pick the best days. You won't light it on a super windy day unless you're doing a high country burn off because you kind of need the wind to work. But how do you then manage the smoke? Like, what would your smoke management plan say?
Yeah, so there are examples other regional councils have developed, and I think that would probably form part. I mean, there's some discussion about what those might include in the issues and options paper. So it might include consideration of weather conditions, notifying neighbours, identifying who might be affected, all of those kind of things. But I can provide further information, and we would provide further information.
Yeah, and so obviously, sometimes if you need a fire permit, it's those sorts of things. One of the things potentially a smoke management plan would do would cut down work for our compliance team. If they knew a fire was happening and they got phone calls, they would be able to say, oh yeah, we know about that burn off. It's a controlled burn off. It's happening here. Unless you see something that looks really untoward, we're probably not going to come out. I'm not saying they'll do that, but part of the challenge we have with outdoor, so there's two things. One is you asked us to provide you options on outdoor burning, so that's what we're doing. If you think that it's not something we should look to manage, then that's okay as well. But I've forgotten the second part of what I was going to say, so it's just one part.
A lot of us do that stuff already where we're under our fire permits. And then there's stuff in our fire permits that if you actually have complied with it, you'd never light a fire. About like your great big pile of stumps that you just lit up, it's been sitting there all year, must be out by nightfall. It won't be out in 5 days, let alone nightfall. So, and you wouldn't have the equipment to put it out without calling in the fire service and a whole heap of helicopters. So it's, even with fire permits, we've moved to a point where the actual detail of the fire permit has reached a point where it's almost impractical as it is. But a lot of us, we let the fire service know anyway that, that we're lighting up a big fire. So I'm just worried that the options we're putting out, a bit like the last one, where they are so well canvassed already, they are so well practiced. We're putting out stuff and reiterating stuff that the actual industry has moved on from. And we're in a better space as it is.
So is there another option there that we haven't included that we should be talking to people? So again, this is, as Avita said, a third of our complaints is about outdoor burning. So it's an activity that generates a lot of work for ORC. And if the compliance team didn't need to address that, then that would free them up for a whole lot of other stuff. And this is the direction that you provided to us in September. So that's why it's here. If there's something else that we're missing, then we're really happy to add it. Or if you don't think we need to be in this space, then that's okay as well.
Well, certainly across the rural sector, especially, just like with spraying, just like that, there are people in the community who will continually complain, and we get it across in our dryland areas. We get it a lot, and Richard, we've had discussions about this. There are people out there watching for burning all the time, but it is such a necessity, because if we don't burn, we create fire risk that worsens the situation. It is a necessary management tool in the rural area. So, I mean, yeah, probably 2F ends up status quo, and 2F again end up at the, I mean, the Lindis were a prime example of, they are lost as to what to do with all of the willow clearing and the piles.
Oh, yeah.
They tried chipping. It's too big. Volumes are just far too big. So if we're going to get into big willow removal in our rivers, we're left with big piles of dead trees. Chipping and other alternatives, just the volume's too big. Anyway.
We have Andrew, Kevin, Brian and Tim. Andrew.
Yeah, I think I pretty much agree with what Gary said about the outdoor burning, and having done a little bit of that myself. And the last time we did that was probably 18 months ago. Quite a fire permit, quite a fire fighting management plan. We're required to have helicopters on standby, for example. But I just wanted to point out also the potential, if there was a ban on outdoor burning, from a forestry perspective, what that would probably mean if you're preparing land for forestry plantation planting. You would use a hell of a lot more spray. Simple as that. So that would be the unintended consequence of preparing land. If you couldn't outdoor burn, you would probably apply an extra spray or two in the lead up to planting. Just a point, unintended consequence.
I'm just thinking we're going to manage spraying under issue 4, so we're coming to that one too. Just wait, there's more.
Oh, yeah. One of my big things is about duplication. And so if the answer was actually to solve our problems was to, as part of talking with FENS and to issue the fire permits, is that those fire permits must be notified to RRC. I mean, I think that gets away with 2C, because I don't see how you have to light your, and within that, so I'll be doing a burn soon, just on my lifestyle block, but you know, I've got to go around to all my neighbours and tell them, like some people don't, but I mean, that's part of that plan, that you've got to go and notify all your neighbours it's happening. And I just wonder, when you look at your burning near urban areas, if the key to that is really around F, but it's also around greater clarity of what you should be doing. You're making sure those plans are right and making sure we're notified. I think it's the biggest part.
Yeah, so just to be clear, we couldn't make FENS tell us because it's ultra-virus. You can't require a third party to do something, but we could require someone who needed a fire permit to tell us. So there's definitely a mechanism in there to do that. Yep.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing, because again, this is just gripes me about New Zealand, is that it's a government type setup. That why wouldn't it make sense that you need to, because I think you need to let your TA know. TAs used to do, the TAs used to, the last big burns was down at Totara, and you did all that through the TA before FENS took over. And then so the TA knew and did everything.
So Fens could make it a condition of their permit to tell the regional council, but the regional council, we can't compel Fens to tell us.
Oh, so we could
Just as a-
have a wee yarn with,
Yeah, yeah, but there's,
yeah.
there's a mechanism in there. Yeah.
yeah, I've got exactly the fella you need to ring and I could get that room in for you. Thanks for that.
I was just going to say exactly what Kevin was going to say, because that drives me crazy. You know, the fire plant should have a smoke bit in there, and we just need to communicate with Fens, not add an extra layer of bureaucracy. You know, that just drives me crazy. Are there any sort of, Gary would know this better than me, but, you know, are there any opportunities to positively communicate, you know, the burn time or something? You know, say this is the burn time of the year. You know, every year they have a celebration in Sandra because, you know, because they burn the grass and it's the start of thinking about your crops. And well, that's whatever. Is there a different? Can there be a narrow window when everybody can go on holiday and Gary can burn his paddock? You know, absolutely. You know, but it's good. I was pleased to hear that there were processes already. You had to notify your neighbours, but there was an incident, wasn't there, in Cromwell where I think one of our councillors got really upset with the amount of smoke that was dropping on people's houses and ash and this type of stuff. How do we get around that? What happened then? Was that an act of nature with the wind turned? Like, we've got all weather data now.
It was a burn off on Northburn Station and it was a big sprayed out gully. And see, the problem is that a lot of these high country properties have interactive public access. And so then we need to be able to spray high country broom, scrub, whatever, to control weeds, but then that all sits there dead and dry. And it's a far greater fire risk, couple with the public access in, and one smoke not stopped out properly and away she goes. And so in that instance, I think the weather just changed, the smoke went across towards Cromwell, but you can't pick what the weather's going to do. You know, my fires that have gotten out of control and you ring the fire brigade for, the wind just turned and went in the wrong direction. I'm not saying there's lots of those, but there's been one or two. I remember them well, but
That's why you're great.
exactly. Very
Sorry.
stressful days though.
Were you gonna say
We
something,
do
Jane?
education through the compliance team around outdoor burning and activities, so that would be continued through option till we.
Well, it goes back to the original question of, you know, how big is this problem? You know, without us putting all this stuff in there, you know, what's the graph that basically says we had, you know, X number of complaints, but it's starting to tail off because of the education work? You know, where are we? You know, or do we, once again, just have to get a dart and throw it at a blank ball?
So that would be the data that Anita has.
Yeah, so
spoken
we've said to you it's a
which
third
is-
of our complaints.
Yes.
And that's over a period, and we gave that to you in September as well.
I know,
So it's a
okay, so
significant
it's a
amount
third
of
of our
work.
complaints. But what, like, for example, what's the trend? How do you break that down? You know, what's the trend? What was it 10 years ago? And you said you're going to give some context, which is really good. But like, is it the burning of grass? Is it the burning of vineyard cuttings? What actually is it? You know, so that we can sort of get a head around, and what time of the year is it? You know, what's the detail that, so that you've asked our opinion, are these the options? But
so the context is having, it's been consistent for the 4.5 years I've been here.
30%.
It's always our highest, or you know, a third of complaints sits around there consistently. The community are really, really sensitive to outdoor burning. So it's an issue, and it's become an issue as well with greater, if you call it urban sprawl, or, you know, intensification in some of those fringe areas through central Otago, which are now on the doorstep of properties that are developing and continue burning as a tool. So there's a difference between perception and effects, and that's a really difficult one to pin down for a particular burning, you know, but it will. At the moment, we've got, what's the term? Something over the property boundary, noxious, objective, or offensive. It's a nightmare to enforce because everyone has a different view of what is noxious, what's offensive smoke, and our team have a really tough job having some of those conversations with people. So there's no easy answer to this one, is my take. It will continue, regardless of what we do, it will continue to be one of our highest reported events because people are super sensitive to any activities that are creating smoke. So I understand what you're asking, but my sense is that we have been consistent for the 4 years I've been here, as in it's continuously a very high issue reported through pollution response.
Are there any learnings that we can take for how TAs manage noise?
No.
Possibly only when it's.
You can turn up with a noise meter. We don't have, there's no equivalent tool to measure the offensiveness of smoke over a boundary.
Makes you wonder how. You'd think it would be, wouldn't it?
It's very, very subjective.
People have different tolerances. If you have asthma or your child has asthma and you live next door to someone versus someone that's lived in the rural area all their life and has burned themselves and understand, then everybody has different tolerances, and that's RMA language. And the challenge with all of the case law around that is it is so personal and subjective. It's the same as signage. What's one person finds offensive in terms of a sign is not the same as another. So it's all conditioning and based on your background and experience. It's the same with burning. It's the same actually with noise. Some people put up with a whole lot more noise or odor than others. It's all, it's all subjective. It's all gets into that objectionable, offensive, noxious, or the RMA language, and it's challenging. But and just in terms of that third of the complaints, Rita or Sarah will correct me if I'm wrong, that third of complaints is not just this year, that is over time, and it's at least 5 years worth of data that we gave you in September. So as Richard said, it's a consistent problem, and even if we do something to manage it, doesn't mean that will necessarily go away. But if we've got visibility over where they're happening, that certainly helps.
All right, we've got 2 more topics to go. And we've got Tim, Kate, Elliot, and Kevin on this one. So Tim.
I guess this is, I had this question 10 minutes ago and Brian sort of asked it, but it is around this 34%. And it also follows up from what Gary's talking about. Obviously in the rural areas with farmers, burning is a tool. So I'd really be interested in knowing what proportion of those complaints are actually rural complaints and what proportion are urban complaints, because we might just have an urban problem here. And if that's the case, then option 2D would be sufficient.
So I can't tell you the percentage, but I can tell you with certainty that a lot of them are rural, but we'll see if we can.
Yeah, it'll just
Most
depend
of
on
the majority of rural.
the granularity of that data, but overwhelmingly,
But a lot of it happens in those fringe areas, which is the challenge we've got.
Thank you.
Kate.
I think the problem with this is hard and fast, and I think there's a whole lot of nuance to it, and it's partly scale and it's partly the type of burning. I see no need for forestry or people doing hedges to burn green waste, and that is something that I think we should be banned and enforcing. That type of, it's just highly expensive in energy to get rid of it. I know it's nice to tidy up stuff like straight away afterwards, but that sort of stuff I absolutely hate. Yet, and I think when we talk about a tool, we have to be really careful about burn off. There are people who burn, say, straw, because of waste of good carbon, but it's a fire risk tool. And I think it's that nuance that people forget. Now, having lived in the Strathtyre when there was a huge fire in Alexandra and it literally had nothing stopping it coming over the hill to us, those big fires are scary at scale. You just need a wind direction, and we were lucky that the wind changed. And we were covered in smoke, and we knew it was coming. You see the scale around the water catchment areas that we all have to be worried about and manage that to protect. So I think what we can't put tools, we can't put bans in place that will stop, and we just have to look at Australia, where they didn't burn trees and do the things that people had done for generations, Indigenous people, and they built up real problems. So I think we just have to be really careful. When farmers use these tools, they are about risk management, not just doing it for the fun of it. The complaints, I actually was going to use the noise example. My father was exceedingly intolerant of noise and would have and regrettably had a whole lot of student pets around us, and they all knew him. He'd ring up on Saturday night and complain and then ask for his cars to be pushed out the garage the next morning. It's the same people he tried to shut down their parties with. I think the two reasons people do this, one is health, totally get it. But it's actually a visual thing for a lot of people who've gone up skiing and want to have a great day skiing, or they've paid a lot of money to be there and want to see the landscape they want to see, which is a difficult one because the landscape's only as good as getting rid of some of the stuff and making it safe. So it's actually the complaints. Do we know why people are complaining? Is it a health issue or is it a visual issue? Because they are different. And the health I can totally get, and whether we should be messaging and trying to encourage people to let people know that they're burning, which is quite different from the visual stuff.
Probably two separate issues, either letting them know they're burning things, a thing that we've covered already, that, you know, that isn't something that happens necessarily for us, but it might happen with a fire permit. In terms of the information that we get from the caller when they are complaining, the team has questions that they ask around that, and we do take a nuanced approach in terms of our compliance and response to that complaint. The flip side, if we don't respond, we then get complaints about not responding, but if we do respond, so all of that is in there in terms of how we respond to these complaints around outdoor burning and the smoke. But in terms of those specific questions the team asks around, are you bringing up and complaining because of a health concern or a visual thing, I don't know the answer to that, sorry.
And can I just say, unfortunately, our jurisdiction is around the equality. Not
so that's what I mean, it's a health issue.
Necessarily health,
Isn't.
It's air quality which can impact health, and it's air quality that can impact visual, but it's quite a narrow focus. So the things that we're talking to you about are because it's your regulatory function under section 30 of the Act. So these are the things you're required to manage, and air quality is one of them.
Air quality, not limited to health.
Air quality.
Equality.
So the NES for air quality is a health derived NES, but we've got broader functions under section 30 in terms of air quality.
It's worth pulling out and just checking that.
Yes, sorry, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering if once we're done with these the issues we've got, I could come back and quickly suggest or test something back in the domestic heating stuff.
On this topic.
On the previous one, the domestic heating one. Yeah.
Okay, we'll see how we're going. We're getting pushed for time here. We'll come back to you, Kevin.
No, I'm good.
Right.
Just in response to Richard's comment that we couldn't meet the smoke issue. My quick Google search here. Has anybody done any work in terms of the opacity smoke meters that are available for
We don't
measuring
have any
smoke?
rules, Brian. We don't have any limits. So we'd need to come up with a limit on a boundary, and then we'd need to get the equipment to do it. So it's not that we can't do it. There's nothing in the plan at the moment that would.
Okay, well, is that one of the
require us.
options?
Could do.
To
It would. Yep. It would.
Yep. Is
So
to
we need to do more stuff,
establish
but that's
limits.
all
Yeah, and also if you're having limits and things like that, and it's a permitted activity, the onus would be on the person doing the burning to make the limit potentially and get that opacity measure as well. I mean,
Well, I think
potentially
that's-
one of the options, so.
I think that should be thought about.
Yeah, I've seen opacity meters, but mainly in terms of large air discharges on commercial properties. So that is of the scale that they are typically used in my experience.
Yeah, but I think.
A Ravensdown would have a meter. Yeah.
Is that an option?
We can include it for you to consider at 11:30. Yep.
Richard.
Yeah, we're thinking about air quality here, I know, and we're also talking about what's handy for people in managing the environment. But just it's important to say, having done botany and studied New Zealand plant ecology, that actually our native plants aren't adapted to fire in New Zealand. They are in Australia, they're not in New Zealand. And whenever that's true, when we burn across landscapes, it does take out plants, and that's happened for hundreds of years, not just recently. When it causes an air pollution problem and it takes out biodiversity, it's important as well to consider.
We'll look, Elliot, we'll try and get through and then come right back if we have time. From a tangata whenua point of view, air is a taonga. Our people would be concerned around health and really what Gretchen's been talking about, biodiversity risk, and there's behaviour needs. We have long been involved in the high country burning issue, which is slowly, over time, has improved. But yeah, so I think what we've heard is all of those options still may need to stay up there for going out to engagement and gathering a lot more information to inform the development of the air plan. So perhaps if that's okay, we can go on to the next topic.
So vehicle emissions is a little bit of an outlier because OLC have limited regulatory powers over this, but if we didn't address it, I think in terms of air quality, we would be remiss. So we are limited in what we can do, but it is a growing issue. And there is a lack of public knowledge because it's a fairly new and emerging issue in Otago. So OLC does have other tools to address the issue, and then some will lie outside of OLC's function. So the tools that we have is the Regional Land Transport Plan, the Regional Public Transport Plan, the Climate Strategy, and to some extent the Air Quality Strategy. So we can include some sort of policies and things like that within the air plan. So there is a lack of public knowledge. Some of the other contributing factors is alternatives to private road transport, the type of vehicle used. Some vehicles contribute more emissions than others, and the urban environment, which ranges from everything from urban sprawl, where you need cars to get anywhere, to the quality of the public realm, which enables people to walk and cycle more. So in terms of the options, we've got the status quo, which is encouraging TAs to do things. We can try and put some new air plan rules and policies in, and I've made a few suggestions in the issues and options paper. Some of the things we can do is ensure reliability, availability and safety of public transport, vehicle decarbonisation, and that will include both the bus fleet and our own OLC fleet, and both of those are in train. Education and behaviour change campaigns, and I think there's work around that we're doing as well. And then of course working with TAs and other authorities and using our influence there.
Thank you. Open for points of clarification or questions.
Do you have any examples of what those new airplane rules and policies look like? In 3B, what those new airplane rules and policies might look like?
Yeah, so I think they're largely kind of building on what we have at the moment, which is rather than sort of encouraging TAs to do this and that, to be slightly more forceful, perhaps to be slightly more forceful about, you know, in the way we're expressing it, in terms of sort of supporting national government campaigns and things like that. When you're thinking about vehicle emissions, I think we can probably have a think about existing uses which generate vehicle emissions. So part of that could be sort of service stations or something like that. So, you know, when you're servicing a car, how long the cars are running for, that kind of thing. I mean, this is quite exploratory, so very much welcome any ideas on that.
Yeah, and I think I'm not entirely sure about how we might introduce policies as more straightforward. If there were going to be rules, they're more likely to be output, so emissions type rules, because we can't control, you know, land transport's not our function under this plan. So there's potentially a nuance in there that, you know, if that's the direction, then we'll go and figure it out. The policies part is easier than the rules part.
And this is an opportunity as well. The issues and options paper is to kind of have that education campaign.
We've got Alan, then Gary. Alan?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, like the home heating issue, which is, you know, part of a much wider issue around housing quality. This one too is part of a much bigger issue, and so that's very good that we, you know, there's an opportunity to raise awareness around that. And I guess, you know, and I'm thinking of, you know, let's make sure we don't get into sort of silo thinking, and so being able to look at those, the bigger picture is really important, and identify the co-benefits, you know, of this sort of action on this, because if we're lowering vehicle emissions, we've also got climate change benefits, as well as those sort of, if we're reducing traffic in some ways, the congestion benefits of livable cities. But it is such an important thing, again, the health issues involved, and I guess I go back to that Happen study, I think is the only evidence that I've really got around that identifies that Dunedin City in particular, the vehicle emissions, in particular the nitrogen oxides, is actually a really serious health issue. And so to be able to raise awareness about that and pull those different parts together through this consultation will be really good. And I note that the paper says that various options here are outside the scope of the air plan, but still if we're able to talk about those and bring them into other ORC actions, I think that's very helpful. Now, that wasn't really a question, but you might have some comment on that sort of bigger picture issue.
Yes, I think you're right that the connection and synergy with other strategies that we have. I mean, there's an awful lot going on anyway, so I know that some of my colleagues are looking at, you know, decarbonising the fleet, and I know that transport colleagues are looking at, you know, the new bus contracts and electrification and things like that. So there are already things underway, and it's important to make those clear. But it's also important to introduce air quality as a reasoning behind some of those other strategies and plans. Yep. and things. Yeah.
This one's very much a walk the talk one for me. So, you know, as the regional council, you know, lead by doing. We've got lots of opportunities outside of the air plan to lead by doing in this space.
Yeah, no, that's good. And if this is a way of introducing the air quality and health reasons for taking those other actions around public transport, for example, then that's really helpful to have got that in there. Thanks.
Hello, Alan. We've got Carrie, then Alexa. Carrie.
Thanks. For option 3D, what is the consultation document likely to detail? What would it say?
We haven't thought about that. I mean, Vita might have some.
The vehicle decarbonisation.
Yeah.
Well, that will include what ORC are already doing. So I've mentioned buses, electrification, and ORC fleet. So both of those are vehicle decarbonisation. It could also look at the electric vehicle. So I know that the government has removed the support for new EVs, which I think was supposed to kind of introduce a second-hand EV thing. So we'd need to consider those changes. EV infrastructure is going to be quite important. So all of these things will have a look, and we can have a look about, you know, what's coming from central government, what our TAs are doing along those lines. So it'd be exploring those sorts of things.
And it
So
might be
within and without ORC's influence.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it might be that once we've got some feedback on it, it's actually steps out of us and goes into you in terms of its lobbying and working with Waka Kotahi and doing all of those sorts of things to kind of implement that rather than being more regulatory focused. So, you know, as Vita talked about, and I think it's one of the plans is to improve the EV network, charging network across the country, and, you know, what does Otago need to make that happen if that's where you want to go.
But this is a plan.
Yeah, but I mean, we've got the air quality strategy also happening. So Hillary's sitting in here, and so some things will fall out of the air plan and fall into their strategy. So this is the longer list of consultation, and then we'll figure out what goes where and who does what and what we need to do as a regulator, what we need to do under the RMA, what we need to do under our other legislation, and then what we need to do as a under the LGA in terms of your full wellbeings.
Thank you.
Kia ora, Alexa.
Kia ora. I think I really want to back up what Alan was saying, but also that just to say that it's really important in this consultation that the big picture in all of these areas is included somehow graphically or whatever, because they're all parts of the same system that have impacts on air quality, but the actions and options have a series of co-benefits that come with them, and it all impacts wider systems. It all impacts land and water and everything else. And somehow that wider way needs to be demonstrated, which is how we will move out of siloed ways of thinking. And I think you're thinking along these lines, but I'd just like that confirmed that we are thinking of demonstrating to our public this wider picture and how these things are connected.
Yep, absolutely. Vita is completely across that. So, yep.
It sounds like, and I just want to make clear of that. Thank you very much.
All right, Lloyd.
I just really thank you. Just really briefly, I'm pretty happy with the way where you're at, because we're at that stage of having options, and I'd just like to say I'm pretty impressed with the flow chart diagrams.
Yes.
So congratulations for those. And
I have to give credit to Emma, who's sitting at the back. She was
Yeah,
the creative brain behind this.
it's pretty awesome. And I just noticed on this one that farm utes seem to be exempt.
So Emma was our summer intern last year, and we haven't let her go. So she's been working for us 1 or 2 days a week this year, but unfortunately is leaving us to take up a graduate role with Becca. So great for Emma, not great for us. She brings some nice youthful capabilities that we'll be upskilling on when she goes.
I'll let her go until she does a diagram for fresh water. Won't take you long. Cool.
Be an invisible ink, won't it? Be so pure.
Kia ora. Look, I think we sort of worked a lot of those issues and questions out in those first two topics, and similar themes coming through here in terms of the way forward, but no changes to the options, I think. Is that how you read it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks. Perhaps we could go on to the last one. Thanks.
So we've separated these out. They're grouped together in the issues and options paper, but we've separated them out a little bit. But they'll probably be, as part of the discussion, a little bit of cross discussion. So discharges from industrial and trade premises, largely in urban areas, they are a source of emissions, and they also include odour and dust, which is why the discussion may cross over there. They're largely controlled by consent conditions, and there are certain permitted activity rules in the current air plan which we could probably sensibly look at just to make sure that those are still appropriate. There are some industrial best practice, and one of the options is going to be to kind of utilise those best practice. And then land use planning, which is really about kind of the proximity between industrial uses and sensitive uses like residential. So in terms of the options, so I've mentioned I think we're probably on the right lines already with the existing air plan, but there are opportunities to strengthen existing rules. So we've been talking, for example, to consent colleagues and enforcement colleagues about what that might look like. We could perhaps introduce a rule to require best practicable options, which is, using best practice as a kind of threshold, and then buffer zones, requiring buffer zones, and this addresses the kind of proximity. So one of the issues that we're finding is the encroachment of sensitive uses on existing industrial uses and vice versa. So we could, consider those kind of things, working with our colleagues in the TAs.
Thank you. Okay. Questions, points of clarification?
So just on the buffer zones, so we've got, let's go to the north end of Oamaru, where there's an industrial zone now. are you saying that you may increase buffer zones and therefore an activity that's already, say, I'm about to build a new building in that zone, that I'm going to have to go further out?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things to consider. Is we're probably not going to be able to remove anything that's existing already. So whatever's been built now is we're not going to be able to, you know, shift either the existing use unless it's done as part of a you know, a plan through the TAs. But this is really about the future. So making sure that no new industrial or any generator really of sort of dust or odour or emissions is near residential accommodation. Does that make sense?
So in an existing zone that it's zoned for that, so that industrial zone is zoned for that, you're saying you'd require the TA to do a plan change, so it would be excluded.
We haven't got into that sort of
But
detail.
Actually, I think it's, so existing zones are zoned, but what you'd be looking at is, oh my God, my brain has just gone blank again, sorry. No, I'll come back to you, I know, what I was gonna say.
Andrew.
It's terrible, so it's gonna be a long 2 days, isn't it, if my brain keeps cutting out like that.
Thanks, Eva. Just on that same comment, Peter. Buffer zones. And when you refer to ensuring industrial activity doesn't occur, sensitive activity close by, equally turning it around the other way.
Yeah.
It's important that the residential activity doesn't creep towards existing industrial areas.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it cuts both ways.
No, it absolutely does, because existing uses need to be able to operate successfully, and they can't do that if people are moving in on, you know, rural residential, those kind of things.
We've got reverse sensitivity in here, so we haven't we? So we've, there's already a mechanism for dealing with it, and it's actually something that frost fans and, you know, wind machines are a real issue in Central Otago with, as residential people encroach on those rural areas, and there's lots of complaints about that. So that's certainly something that we can use. We wouldn't be asking the TAs to do a plan change. Any new zoning would require, and generally that happens anyway, that there's a larger setback on the outside of an industrial zone if it's adjacent to a residential zone. One of the areas that's really problematic is McNulty Road in Cromwell, where the residential area just on that, right on the southern end towards Bannockburn, has got right up against that industrial area. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen going forward. And so some of the other levers we have is actually plan changes. We submit on plan changes, and we're looking out for that sort of stuff. So we want to make sure that we've got a, you know, that lens across it.
Yeah,
It did come back.
Yeah, and sorry, but just to follow, I'm really nervous about this best practice wording, and that who determines best practice, and
The best practicable option is defined in the RMA, and it's used. Yeah, it's been used, I'm guessing, for donkey's years.
Not that long, but one of the good things is it's kind of a bit more adaptive. So it means that as new technology comes along, we're not necessarily constraining people to older technology, and they can say, this is now the best practical option for managing this year discharge. Therefore, we're going to put that in. So it actually is kind of building a little bit of resilience and flexibility into the system.
And it's often quite useful for the applicant or the consent holder themselves in terms of the most practical option rather than maybe potentially what is.
It's two different definitions, isn't it? Best practice versus best practice.
This is a BPOs actually, and there's a whole lot of international study around BPOs. It's quite a common term.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Wow. No further questions, comments?
Well, odour, a related subject, and I guess it's a similar kind of introduction, really. Odour is a little bit different, isn't it? Because you can't see it. It affects people, as we've noticed, in different ways. Some people are more sensitive to it, but it does cause nuisance, and it does affect amenity, you know, the quality of people's lives. And there's an awful lot of complaints about it. So it comes from a variety of sources, often industrial, but you know, it could be farming as well. It's controlled through consent conditions largely. It's difficult to investigate. And again, there's kind of this use of best practice and the land use planning element as well, where you want to try and avoid proximity and reverse sensitivity.
Challenge with odor is it's often an effect of an activity rather than activity in itself. And therefore the land use planning is quite important in that aspect.
And there's no equipment that you can monitor it, you know. So we can strengthen existing rules for industrial and trade premises. The best practicable option would include odour. We've already talked about buffer zones. Other authorities have introduced odour management plans, and we could explore that possibility as well. And then we can include more information about FIDAL assessments. Now, FIDAL assessments is how our enforcement colleagues assess odour and their impact. And it is quite difficult because, as Richard said, it's very subjective. But other authorities have put sort of a more detailed set of assessments into their plans, just to allow both the complainant and I suppose the source of the odour to understand how it's going to be assessed and sort of manage expectations around in that way.
Terry.
Thanks. Just when we see a number like 33% of complaints, which is a concerning number, it would be really good to have a secondary number that is the actual percentage of where it was proven the complaint was justified.
So which ones resulted in enforcement action, do you mean? Or?
Yeah, or one where an investigation was undertaken and it was actually found, yes, there was either an infringement notice or it's something issued where the compliance officer agreed that the complaint was justified.
Yeah, as you'll know, our compliance approach also starts with education and having a conversation first. So it may be with a complaint we have taken that education base first. So I guess it's teasing out what you mean by justified with that. Yeah.
Even under an education decision made by the officer, it's still saying, well, you've done something wrong here, but we don't want to see you do that again.
Right.
So in that case, then the complaint is justified because there's a hope it isn't going to happen again.
Yeah, we might need to just have a think about how we would respond to that, because sometimes it's not also automatically a visit. It's in line with our protocols that we've got in place. So I can have a talk to Tammy about what that would look like and provide that information back to Anita.
I think it would just be helpful from my perspective if you see 33%, you think, well, that's concerning. But actually, if it's 33% and 31% actually showed there was an issue, then that's
yeah. The challenges, as we talked about before, odour is really subjective. So if somebody feels that they need to complain, then it's a valid complaint, whether or not a compliance officer goes out and has the same perception doesn't mean the complaint wasn't valid. So it's really challenging with odour. It's really hard to say to someone that thing that you don't like the smell of is fine.
It's my favourite smell.
And also
I love the smell of petrol, but not, not everyone else does.
Yeah. And there's a timing and a wind direction with odour as well. So there's a lot that goes on. So
we'll see what we can do, but it's a challenging one because of that subjectivity.
Yeah.
Cooking mutton birds.
Yeah, and probably my worry around the A to C is because you say strengthen the existing rules, but if everyone's actually complying, but people are moving closer and shortening up that buffer zone, and are you going to make them go tougher on their rules? And that would sort of annoy me if just because someone's Andrew and Brian and Kate have decided to go and build a house there, and all of a sudden they're complaining. You know what I mean? So that's the balance between strengthening existing rules and that are good enough anyway, and the buffer zone.
One of the challenges with our industrial and trade premises is that if they're in an area where they don't comply with the air quality, we can't grant consents for them. So it's really important that we actually provide some headroom. And one of the ways to do that is by strengthening the existing rules and requiring people to reduce their discharges, because you could have an industrial area that no one else can. Is that still the same for the NEs? That's still right? Still right. I think that's still right.
Yeah, you might have one person in there that's and yet no other business can go in there because we've all exceeded the limit as such.
Yeah. So we've got to be really careful about making sure that we can balance that out.
Okay. Good.
Andrew.
Sorry, Joe.
No, I got too excited.
I'm not sure whether this is an issue, but it's certainly a trend. A lot more people either compost at home or the community composting regime up and running, or on a more of a commercial scale. So just thinking about odour and that as being, you know, a potential source of concern, and also think about worm farming as well. The odour move towards recycling, kitchen waste, sort of thing.
Yeah, and we can, odour is one of those ones where it's, we can have really useful policies around, you know, if you're doing things, and talk to the TAs about, you know, you've already got bylaws for things like housing of poultry, so that they're not too close to boundaries, so they don't cause, you know, noise and odour impact. So there are other vehicles that we can use in terms of making sure we don't discourage that, but we, you know, there's some sensibility around location and siting and management.
Just go back, sorry, through the chair, back to Gary's point about complaints, and I haven't got the answer for the tally on that one, but when we're having the discussion about outdoor burning, I just had a look at the compliance report, and I could only find the 21-22, and there was 278 complaints about outdoor burning, and 18 of those were processed to enforcement action. So just to give you an idea of the total. Sorry.
Right, thank you. We could go on to odour perhaps. Is it that's dust, sorry.
I'm conscious of time, so dust is a similar issue to odour. Weather conditions, so the dry, hot weather conditions probably exacerbate it, and that's probably the main difference. But all of the rest of it is very similar, so I won't dwell on that. And the solutions are also, or the potential options are also quite similar. If you move on to the options. So I won't go through them, but they're very similar to the odour.
Thank you.
What I'll just say about dust is, in my 20-something years of RM work, no one wants to take responsibility for dust. So it goes back and forth between TAs and regional councils. We've done some really good work through appeals to QL and DCC to make sure that dust is in effect, that they are managing through activities. So obviously if you're subdividing, you generate dust. So it's now a matter of consideration, but it is also an effect in terms of air quality that we need to manage. So again, it's an activity and it's an effect. So it's one of those ones that's slightly more challenging to deal with.
Well, DCC certainly turned their back to roading dust problems, now requiring landowners to pay for it directly.
Wow. Thank you very much.
There's another one, isn't there?
Yeah, there is a final one.
Oh, aggregate chemicals, yes.
Yeah, so they are subject to national legislation and codes of practice, and that is somewhat embedded in the air plan, but there could be improvements made there. The effects of spraying can occur when the spray drifts into non-targeted areas, essentially, so onto neighbouring properties. So the weather conditions obviously have an impact. There is industry standards, and land use planning is also a contributory factor. And the options really that we've developed is to strengthen the existing rules. You move on. Including the kind of the notification of the council and affected properties, which is something that other regional councils have done.
At what scale?
How do you mean?
Yeah, backpack, my neighbour in the
Yeah, aerial spraying.
Only aerial.
There are rules for both.
Sorry, Gary.
So when we say strengthening, I suppose, yeah, at what scale? Because like if we're going to regulate this more than it currently is, what I see of the contractors who are out there, they do a very, very proficient job, and they operate under a really high standard now in comparison to maybe what might have been a few years ago. complaints are always super exaggerated beyond just dealing with one. I know, many that we see are super exaggerated. So what's suggested here is that, like, if notifying the ORC, how would that work? Like, would you be wanting a phone call from Helicopters Otago at 6 o'clock in the morning, like they've just rung me to say, can we spray? Is weather good? Are the ORC then to be asked, is it okay to spray by them? Because it's a very day by day.
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways, but
Yeah.
it'd be very simple to send an email to say we're spraying today here. But there's what I will say is I know that the contractors industry across the country are really good at engaging in their plan discussions to make sure that we get the best framework that works for them, and that would be what we'd be looking to do here.
What would that achieve though? Like, we just said spraying through 50 properties. And so would we be notifying for 50 properties and they might stop after 20 because the weather turned bad? And so they're going to come back another day. You know, what would be the purpose of the email to the ORC to say we're spraying today?
I'm not sure. But,
Well, it helps people, so residential properties, for example, some of the complaints that ORC receive is that it goes into their water supply, it goes onto their veggies, these kind of things. So that would help if people were notified, property owners were notified, they'd be able to, just prepare. So there's that. Also, it will help enforcement. So the notification came out of conversation with enforcement colleagues, compliance colleagues, and other regional plans have done something similar. So they've got, I mean, again, the detail is yet to be thrashed out, but there are examples of what the notification might look like from other regional councils that are doing it.
Very full.
Yeah. Sorry.
And I mean, if we go out and consult on this and we get feedback from the industry that it actually doesn't work and we don't see any benefits in terms of ORC as a function, then we wouldn't pursue it. But if we don't test based on the direction you gave us, then we've got no justification to walk back from it.
So I could probably talk about a particular one that where a helicopter company had 14 spray jobs that day, on a particular day. All the properties were contacted. The contract was sort of all sorted out. Those 14 people, it was the job of the 14 people to go and tell the neighbours that was happening on that day. And it did happen on that day, but there was one neighbour actually didn't go and talk to the people, and that caused a bit of grief, or did cause grief. But I think at the end of the day, the grief was limited to a perception rather than spray drift. So and that's sort of the operating under best industry practice, just other than us being aware that that was going to happen, then we could say, we know that's happening and they should be operating under. I'm struggling to see the advantage of us. I can see the advantage of us knowing that, but I just can't, apart from the complaint side, what it actually gains for anyone.
I think my understanding of the rules at the moment, there's nothing that requires or promotes someone to let us know. So that situation you're explaining then, that's great and excellent, what we would encourage, but that's based off the contractor operating that way. So I guess this is where we're talking about how we encourage everybody to operate that way within a potentially permitted activity criteria or something like that, or other means. So that is one of the options that is available, because that situation may not happen throughout Otago, and it's great that that industry is doing that.
Yeah, and I wonder if that actually is that is part of their license to spray anyway. And have we looked at that?
I just need to look back, because if we don't have even a permitted activity rule, they'll need a consent because it's a discharge to air. So just remember back. So we've got to have, like the Land and Water Plan, we've got to have at least something in there. What it looks like is the bit that we're talking to now.
I went to speak to the agrochemical sprayers in Christchurch at one of their conferences, so I am in touch with them, and they will be able to provide feedback.
Right, so can we talk to Otago ones? Can we actually talk?
Yes,
to
I mean they spray regionally.
Yeah, but yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah, we will.
No,
Absolutely,
yeah,
we
yeah,
will.
no, we
Yep,
need to
yep.
talk to a target-based sprayers.
Absolutely, we will.
Yeah,
Because
it was a
10
national, it was a
people are
national
quite different.
conference.
Yeah, yeah.
So I had a guy at the Land and Water Plan drop-in sessions who was in the spray industry, and he
Yeah.
raised matters about water and air. So
Yeah.
we've got that context.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's really good.
Sure, apologies for time management. We're running over time. Okay.
Oh, look, I think the more plans that you cover, sorry, the same activity is in page 174 of the draft plan and regional water plan, and it talks just about boundaries, the setbacks from, but I think if you have to look into the land and water plan, see what your rules are and the air plan, then it's really difficult. And I'm just going to challenge you whether we can have one place for the rules for agricultural spraying. Okay.
No.
Anyway,
Look, the MBEA might have let us do that, but under the existing ARMA structure.
yeah, as communicated one page. The question is, if you're telling your neighbours, are you asking permission? And it can't be in the way that you're asking permission because the neighbours.
You can't have a rule that requires a third party approval. It's
Yeah.
not Tavares, so you can't do that.
No, it's the problem is sometimes it's just bad neighbours that can't get on, that seem to use these as an excuse to stuff around. Can I just be the warning is, if you make it harder for people to do some spray, we've got neighbours who just will not spray gorse, and it drives me absolutely bonkers. I'm constantly spraying across the fence line because of that. It's all, well, they don't mind me doing that, they just don't want to do it themselves, and but it's perversity sometimes when it gets harder for the people doing the right thing than the person doing the wrong thing. And that is what we have to be really careful about, because no one is worrying about, no one wants to lay a complaint, but it's really hard to get action sometimes.
We're not suggesting any fundamental changes to the current situation. I think that's the point. We can have a look at where we might be able to strengthen it, but
There is a agricultural code of practice self-regulated, I think. Might be worth looking at. I don't know that it was ever that good. It might have improved over time.
You've got to take words like strengthen into context, that the fact that some of these rules are 20 years old and industry practice has moved a really long way and then, and so strengthening our existing rules doesn't necessarily mean we're being difficult. It just actually sometimes means we're getting up to speed
Up to
with
speed
where
with what's
everyone
happening.
else is. So it's always that context of some of these rules are 20 years old.
Existing rules, if they are 20 years old, would be covering practices that have far more modernised. And so what we're doing now is 1000% better than what was done back then.
Yeah.
So the rules may actually be able to weaken as opposed to strengthen.
Yeah, well, potentially, yeah. But I think you'll find that the rules have a lot more granularity now than what they did, and you might find that some of the new practices don't comply with the existing rules, which is not good. I'm not saying they do, but things have changed so much, and part of this is just bringing the plan into the 2020s.
Well, look, we probably need to have a bit of a break before the 11:30. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, I'll just move it.
So we'll just take 10 minutes to work on those resolutions. Fleur and Kylie have started, which is helpful. Just I got distracted in that trying to look at them, but yeah, and we'll come back to
Yeah, thanks very much. It was a very useful workshop. Thanks. Back at 11:30.